Yay! Exciting. Okay, so we had car makes working, and we said that the other thing that we wanted was to have models, right? And the idea is that every make has multiple models, right? Nissan makes a whole bunch of different kinds of cars. Tesla makes a couple kinds of cars. Volkswagen makes a bunch of different kinds of cars. Let's go and create some models of types of cars and see how we can relate them back to makes and different ways we can manage them here on our admin side. So let's open up code and let's make this full screen in our browser. And then let's also bring up our AutoTrader markdown file. Right, where we're keeping track of the attributes of a model. Right, so it looks like all we really had for a model was its name and which make it belongs to. Right, not a whole lot of information. So let's run a migration for this. So we're going to generate a scaffold called model. And it's going to have two attributes, a name that's going to be a string. And the other thing that it's related to is the make of car references. So this is the model that this model, car model, refers to. We're going to generate a scaffold for a model called model. Ugh. That's going to have a name, that's a string, and it's going to be related to the make that it references. And we'll see here that this is going to generate, again, another migration at models model. It's going to add a route for resources from models, our controllers and our views. Same kind of thing. We're going to get separate views for our models. So we may want to style them differently, add information, move things around. Let's go take a look at the migration that it created. Aha. So we have string, name, references, make, foreign key, true. That's not quite correct. This should be makes, plural. So this is a mistake. References should be, this should be makes, I'm pretty sure. References, makes. So let's destroy this scaffold. So rather than generate,
is that because you did the instance variable makes?
no, it's because I did singular make instead of plural makes.
So that would reference the entire table rather than the column?
No, and we want it to refer to the entire table,
Okay.
but it would refer to the wrong table name. There's no table called make.
Oh,
It's plural, that this references the makes. So this needs to be the plural name here.
I thought we made our table singular.
Our tables names are plural. Our model names are singular. So model, not models. Our table names are going to be plural. And normally we don't have to generate them here, right? But for the references, we have to use this. I wonder, although I don't know, if we said destroy, and rather than use the lowercase, I wonder if we said this, make with a capital, so it refers to the model, what would that do? Let's take a look at our migrations now. Nope, still the same thing. So we want this to be makes. No, I was right the first time. I take that back. I was right the first time. Scrap that. This is make.
So it is singular for our table.
Yeah, let me double check, because I'm doubting myself now. So when I doubt myself, Rails guides. So this is kind of the canonical truth Rails guides. And what we want to look at is migrations. And we want to look for references. Add reference to products. User, it's singular. The user references. Also, the generator calling access type as references, also available as belongs to, for instance, user references. So we were right, it was make references. I was correct the first time. But a good demonstration, we can destroy and recreate that scaffold if we think we made mistakes. I was right the first time. The Rails guide says one of the things you can do is use references as the type, and it's showing me that it's singular. So it just looked weird when I looked at it here in the migration.
Can you search up Rails guides?
Rails guides. Rails guides. This has all the documentation for anything you want to know about Rails. And there are references in some of, if you go through the handbook, I've given links to the very good sections of the guides to read. And on the homework assignments, there have been references to the guides. If you're not looking through those references sections on the handbook and in the homework, you're missing out on some good stuff. Generally, if there's like a resources section of the homework, you should be reading those probably prior to doing the homeworks. And I referenced the migrations and the models section on a couple of the assignments from last week. So now we're going to have the models have a name, and it's going to reference the make. And if we look at our models directory, where we keep track of the model, it belongs to the make. Right? It added that part for us automatically. But what it didn't add is the reverse association from the make back to the model. So a make has many models. Right? Nissan has many models, Tesla has many models, Volkswagen has many models. So when we generated that references, the model references the make, we got the belongs to here automatically. But we didn't get the reverse part of that automatically. Rails, unfortunately, is not smart enough to go and add that the other way. Personally, I think it should, because 99.9% of the times you want the other side of the relationship to have the has many. This belongs to, we want the other side to has many. So this looks good. Let's migrate that database change. Let's get that database change in the database. Here we go. So it created that table.
DB migrate just kind of like saves it for the database.
It tells the migration system, any migrations you haven't run, please run them now. And you'll notice that now that I've run that, if I run migrate again, nothing happens because it knows which migration files have been run and which migration files have not been run. Now, if I was working with a partner here, right, I've got a senior dev on my team, and they're working on the same repository, I go away for a week and I come back, and they've generated 16 migrations. One of the very first things I'm going to have to do before I can run the app after doing a git pull is I'm going to have to run Rails DB migrate and run all 16 of those migrations. Right? So it knows not only which migrations have you not run, but what order to run them in, because they're time-stamped. Right? The name of the file's got the year, month, day, hour, minute, second built into it.
So if you didn't do that and then you went into Postgres to look for that, it wouldn't be there.
Correct. And if I tried to run my Rails server, it would tell me, can no do, you've got migrations pending. Right? Before I ran that migration, the models table did not exist. Cool. Let's see what our server looks like now. Right, if I go back in here and I run I run this, right? Nothing under makes, but under models, I now have the same scaffold style here. Let's make a new model. S. Now it's asking me for the make. Right? What it's actually asking me for is the ID of the make. Well, I don't remember what that is. Let's go back to makes. What was Tesla? It was 1.
What's the best way to find that if your list is like 1,000 items long?
We're going to talk about that in a second, because this is kind of ridiculous that we have to like
Count.
know which one is which, right? Not necessarily count, but like look at the ID. Okay, so now if we pull up this model and ask this model when its make ID is, it's make ID 1, but the make itself is the Tesla, right? This model's makes company name is Tesla. Well, that's kind of silly, right? That doesn't seem reasonable to have to do this, nor does it seem necessary to like show the make object here, right? It's not what we want. So this is a case where what we really want to be able to do is show this makes company name. So let's go find that view first and fix that. So let's scroll and find app, views, models, index. And we don't want to show the make, we want to show the make's company name. Right. And now we get, this is an S from Tesla. Right. And now in our edit or our new, right, this is the new action. This is the HTML page for our new action. You'll see that both new and edit both render an HTML page called form. So it shares this form. Here's the HTML for the form that shows this. So you'll see that it starts with some ERB with the form with tag. Which model are we editing? The model. We'll talk about local true versus local false later. And this form with yields us a form object. So this form object has all kinds of helpers for labels and text fields. That's what's generating all of these inputs here. This input right here that I have highlighted is coming from this line of code. This label for name is coming from this line of code. We're asking that form to generate a label, and you'll notice that it has all of the label for business on it, right? All the HTML that we would normally have to have, right? So if I click on this label, see how it automatically selects the right field, right? It's generating the right semantic kind of thing. This form text field is generating an input type text with an ID and a name, and the name is the right name for this field. Right? This is the name, model name. But I don't really want an input for this make ID. Wouldn't it be nice if this was a drop-down list of all of the makes? Let's go back to the Rails guides, and then let's go look at Action View form helpers. So the Action View form helpers talks about all the different functions that we can do inside of forms. So somewhere in here, select boxes for dealing with models and option tags from a collection of arbitrary objects. So if we look at this, right, we want something like this. We want to be able to say, given all of the makes, I want to select which make ID I have. So Rails gives us a different helper. Instead of a text field, what I want is I want a collection select. I want a select tag for my make ID from all of the makes. The value part is going to be the ID. The display part is going to be the company name. That's what form collection select is going to do. And why is that in a weird color? I don't know. Let's see if we can find out. Is there an error? Aha! Now I have a dropdown. Okay. Now I have a dropdown. We'll notice that there's other options we can add here. There are other options we can add here. Although it doesn't give us here. There's another option we can pass where you notice that it automatically selects the very first one. There is another option, I think it's empty true. Blank true. I'll have to look it up. There's an option we can throw in here that if we don't want it to have there to be an automatically selected one, we want it to automatically be blank. But let's do this. Let's add another one for Nissan makes the Altima. Here we go. And Nissan also makes the, don't they also make the Versa? Thank you. Cool. All right, so we've got a couple cars in here. Let's also, Tesla makes the 3 to make it really easy. Tesla makes the X. Volkswagen makes the Golf. Cool. There's a whole bunch. Okay. So here's a bunch of models. Let's go back to the makes for a second. It'd be nice here if on this list we listed how many cars each one of these companies makes, right? I'd like to know how many cars for Tesla, how many for Volkswagen, how many for Tucker, so forth and so on. So if you're like, well, I want to add this feature to my Rails UI, what page am I on? Up here. Makes. So that is going to always be the index page for my makes controller. So let me go take a look at my makes controller. All right. Oh, I do have all the makes here. Awesome. Let me go to my views for makes for index and think about what do I want to add. I want to add another header. Let's call it number of models. Let's add a header for that. Yeah. Oh, I wonder if it doesn't know. It may not know ERB. I may have to add in. I may have to look up what the VS Code language support is for ERB. I think that's why it doesn't understand the ERB tags just quite right. I think that's why like these things are funnily syntax highlighted. I'll look for that in a second. So after the company name, we want the number of models. So we want some number here, right? Let's first hard code it to 42. I know that's not the number of cars there are for each one of these makes, right? But I just want some number there, right? I'm always going to cheat and kind of hard code something and then figure out how to do it dynamically. So if we were in Rails console, right, this is like our little IRB, our interactive Ruby. If I had the first make, I know that my make has many models. Right? So here's my make singular object. I'm going to ask it for all of its models, plural. And it's going to give me back that there's a model S and a model 3 and a model X. But I can also ask that for a count. And Rails is smart enough to say, oh, you didn't really want all of the models array. You just wanted to count how many there were. Because if you were very careful looking at this is actually not an array. Make.models returns this thing called an active record association collection proxy. This is a thing that walks like an array, talks like an array, acts like an array, but is not an array. So all the things that you can do in an array, like ask for its size and use map and use each and sum it, all those things can be done, but it's not actually an array, because if this were an array and I ask for the size, if I ask for the length, yeah. So look at this. If I ask for the length of this thing, it's going to treat it like an array. And what does it do? Right? It does select a model star, makes the entire array, and then counts how many things are in that array. What would happen if this particular make had thousands of models? We would build a huge array of all those models just to count how many there were. So Rails is really smart and says, hey, if you're asking for the association, in this case, I'm asking for this makes models, but you don't actually need the individual models, I'm not going to load them until you ask me to do something. And if you're asking me to count them, I can be smart and say, no, I don't need to select them all from the database. I'm just going to count them. I'm going to ask the database to do that. Okay? So this gives me a select count star from models. So that means here, what I can do is say, hey, make, for your models, please count how many there are. There are 3 Teslas, 1 Volkswagen, no Tuckers, no Daimlers, and 2 Nissans in the system. Cool. What if when I show the Tesla, I would like to have a list of all of the models? Right? It's not enough for me just to see that, hey, there's a company called Tesla. I want to see what are the 3 models that make up a Tesla. Well, what URL am I on? I'm on makes1. How do I know to find what page to go look at? Let me run Rails routes. Right, if I don't know what page to go look at, let me make this smaller so we can see it. Right, all I have to do is say, oh, this is makes/1, and this is a get. Let me find makes, makes/1, and this is a get. What am I on? I'm on makes show. So that means I can go to the makes show controller, the makes controller show action, or if I'm just looking for the view, views makes show. If I just type list of models and reload the page, yep, this is where I am. So let's put an unordered list in here. And now what I want really is something that looks like, this has the model S, and the model 3, and the model X. Yes, Elon was going for a pattern. He was actually forbidden for calling it the Model E from Ford. That's literally what he was going to do. So there you go, a little bit of insider information.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty funny. Right, but I don't want to hard code this list. I want this list to be dynamic, right? So rather than hard code it, I'm going to say ERB tag that doesn't output, hey, make models each do model. Hey, make that I'm currently looking at, take your models and go through all of them. And for every one of those, I want you to output an LI that has that model's name, end. Right? Every loop in Ruby, something.eachDo blah, end. Right? If we were just looking here at this part starting here and ending here, right? If we were just writing plain old Ruby, right, maybe we would do something like this. And if we were writing plain Ruby without ERB and HTML, we would write this code. Right? If this were in console, there's our S, our 3, and our X. Right? But we don't want to puts them. We want to wrap them in ERB tags, right? So we wrap this in an ERB tag. We wrap this in an ERB tag because this is Ruby. And then rather than puts, we want an LI. And we wrap this in an ERB tag. An outputting ERB tag because we wanted output. That's how I ended up with this. Right? So now, with this, there's my S, my 3, and my X. But if I go back to Volkswagen, I get just the Golf. And if I go back to the Nissan, what happens if I come back to the Tucker? Nothing. So what if I only want to show this if there are any models? Well, this is Ruby, so I can ask for an if statement. If there are any models in that list, show them. Otherwise, maybe we would say something like link to create a new model, comma. Now I need the link to make a new model. How do I find that out? I come back to my Rails routes. I want this link here, whatever this is, right, not to be a link to Google. I want this to be a link to a new model. Where's my new model? Well, here's models new. That's the new model helper. So this will be the new model path. Now for any car that doesn't have any models, there'll be another link. Create a new model. Right? For any car company that does, I don't get that link. I don't know, maybe it's not the right user interface. I just wanted to show you that you can change the user interface. P. This company has no cars. Let's put this inside of a P tag. All right, so if we go to Tucker, right, we get this message. But if we go to somebody, right?
List of models. It's not wrapped in any kind of tag. Does that matter?
No, it does not.
Okay.
It'll just be it'll just be bare text. You could wrap it in a P tag if you wanted to.
So it just defaults to like a
Bare,
P1?
yeah, just bare text.
Okay.
Just plain text. Right. So now we have our models and our makes. Question?
I may have missed the part, or I don't know if we did it, but is there a difference between @make and @makes? Because I know for the index you had @makes for all.
So let's go, I don't mean to print. Let's go to the makes controller and let's look at index. Index does @makes equals make.all. but new and show are singular.
Okay.
So they're at make. So that's just what the code generated. You're going to kind of see that following. If you see something in a Rails app like at people, you can pretty much guarantee that's going to be an array. If you see at person, that's going to be a single object. So most Rails developers kind of follow that pattern of singular names for objects and plural names for arrays or collections. Cool. Maybe what we want here for our makes is to have these sorted. Let's change at makes to add an order clause at the end of our all. Okay. Now they're going to come out sorted. If we were doing this as an API, we wouldn't care, because maybe we let the API, maybe we let the JavaScript deal with sorting. But maybe we do want it to come back in the API sorted. Right? But in the user interface, we have these displayed in alphabetic order. What if we wanted there to be some kind of search, some kind of filter, where if we applied a filter, right, give me all of the makes that have an A in their name. What happened? I jumped out of full screen mode somehow. Oh, no, I ended up with 2 copies of the, that's weird. All right, we want to be able to add a parameter to here for a filter to give me all of the car makes that just have an A in their title. So in the index, I can ask for more parameters. I can say something like, hey, give me a filter variable that is params filter. Now I could say, if there's a filter, the makes are make all order company name, where the company name like percent filter percent. Right. We did this before when we were just doing active record. But you see that I can chain them along. Say, hey, make, give me everything ordered by company name, but only where the company name is like this filter. Otherwise, the makes are all of them. If I have a filter, I only get the ones that have that variable V, I get Volkswagen. You'll notice that there's some duplicated code in here. I can just say let's make a variable called all makes. Let's simplify this a little bit. Right? I don't want to repeat that make all order company name 2 times. So if there's a filter, my makes I'm going to pass to my view are all of the makes where the company name is like that filter. Otherwise, the at makes are going to be all of the makes that I got up here. Okay. And now, if I change this filter to be a U, right, I get Tucker. E, I get all of the car companies have an E in their name. I could add a little form here with a little input box where I could type in that filter, and when I press enter, I'd end up getting this. right? The idea here again is that the controller is the traffic cop. Right? I kind of said it decides what to pull from the database. So I didn't change the view, right here. The view didn't change. Which cars are being displayed is the same, but which makes I pulled out of the database is different depending on whether or not this filter parameter shows up in the URL. Right? So the traffic cop controller determines what to pull. Let's do this. We've got a few minutes because we started a little bit late. So here's our models, right? And you'll notice here, if I go in and make a new model, right, I got to keep selecting this list of the make and enter it. Maybe it makes more sense from the makes page when I'm editing one of these for there to be a form here that lets me create a new model, right? And let's do this. Let's also add, bless you. Let's also change the edit page to also show the list of models. So let's also change the edit page from make to also show the same list. And what we'd like to have is for there to be a little form on this page. Oops. Have a list of models and a form down here to add a new model. Right? There should be a form right here to add a new model. So this we have to do manually. Scaffold's not going to help us. So what we need to do is go look at the form that we would have for a model anyway. Here's the model for the form. Right, it's got a name and a make and a submit. Let's grab all of this and copy it and paste it here. And I'm going to get rid of this part here that talks about errors. So on this page, we don't know what model this is going to be. We know this is going to be a new model. And we actually don't want this make ID to be filled in. What we want this to be is we want the model to automatically, to automatically be filled in. So we don't actually want this in here. That means this is not necessarily just a new model. If we come back to our handy dandy console, one of the things the has many association gives us, let's find our first make. This is Tesla. If we ask for make models, we get back all the models. But just like if we call .count, we get the count. If we call .new, look what we get. We get a new model object, but what's filled in? Yeah, which ID? The make ID. If at make is the last make models new, what's filled in? Which make it is. So rather than just ask for any new model, what I want is the current make, its models new. Now all I need to do is have a form for the name. They're going to come out with a model Y. That's interesting. That didn't work. Oh, I still need to fill it in. I still need to fill it in. Let's go back and leave the form in there for a second. Let's leave the let's leave this in. Let's go back to our makes. And let's edit this. All right, let's leave this in here for a second, right? You see that it automatically filled in Tesla. If I come back and I go to Volkswagen, right, it automatically fills in Volkswagen. Let's come back here to Tesla. Here's a little form down here. Maybe what we want is an H1. Let's make that H2. Create a new let's put a little H2 in there. And let's put a horizontal rule in front of that. Right. Hey, look, it says create a new Tesla model. Let's make the Model Y. But now it takes me to the page that shows the model. It's not really what I want, right? So maybe what we want now is in the models controller, when we create a new one, maybe what we want to do is redirect back to the make for this model. Don't go to the model, go to the make for that model. That will keep me on this page. So here's the Tesla. They're going to create the Roadster 2020. Right. Maybe what we want is stay on the edit page for this rather than be on the show page for it. So we can control where our forms show up and where we get redirected as our needs change. The scaffold can't predict how we want our interface to exist, but it does not prevent us from changing how this works. It does not prevent us from putting different forms on different pages and having the controller code redirect us based on where we want to be. Right? If we update this, right, if we update Tesla Motors, right, this is the make controller sending us somewhere, as opposed to here, this form gets sent to the models controller because we're touching a model. Right? And we told that to send us back here. So if you're building a full monolith application, depending on how custom your user interface is, maybe you don't want to start with a scaffold, because the scaffold is going to make certain choices for you that may not line up with how you designed your interface. So this is why students normally like fall in love with like, oh, I just type Rails, generate scaffold, my app, and I give it the list of fields, and boom, here's a listing, right, of all of the makes and the number of models, and it looks really nice and fancy, right? I can even show you, maybe I'll show it to you tomorrow morning. I have a Rails template that adds a Bootstrap, which is a prepackaged CSS system, right? That all of the templates are now bootstrapped, and it looks pretty. Not amazing, but it looks nicer than this, right? It gets you closer to a working app. But you'll notice that as our needs change, how far scaffold gets you kind of falls apart, right? If your app is really custom. This is where the idea of letting Rails just be the back end providing you data, right? And taking tools like React that are kind of geared towards making user interfaces sometimes may work better for you, right? I can tell you for my history as a Rails developer, this is how I've coded. Primarily not generating scaffolds, because the apps that I work on, their interfaces are custom enough that we don't have the same create, read, update, delete in the same redirect patterns. What you tend to have is a pattern that the other developers on the team or you set up and you just kind of follow from time to time. So you create a new controller and you fill in the code and you tell it where to redirect, right? And what paths to end up on based on the style of your application is, right? For instance, in one of my apps, there was never a difference between show and edit, right? There was never a time where I wanted to show this and have this page. There was only ever an edit, right? So I never put show actions in my app. There was no reason for them. Why do I need one page to show me the information and a different page to edit, right? 99% of the time, what people wanted to do was go in and edit the thing. They didn't want to see it and then choose to edit it, right? But what's nice is this gets you to the point where you can start having all of this data in your application. Now we have all of the cars, their makes and their models. Let's go back and look at this JSON builder, right? Here we had the capitalized name. Remember this when we had models.json, right? And we had makes.json, right? The capitalized name. What if we wanted number of models or model count? Well, we remember that's make.models.count. Oops, typo. Hey, now our API has how many models there are. Right? If we wanted to add the models, we could add the models in like this. So this is the make models. Let's generate the models model as model. So we're going to use the existing, what's going on? Undefined models for nil. Oh, it's not at make, it's make. And can't merge. This is why I hate. I don't use JBuilder, so I often forget how this works. There we go. Right? So now the models, it's going to take each model that shows up in the models for a make and render the models view models.json and give me back all the models. So here I have, for the make, give me its ID and company name. Give me its ID and company name. Give me the URL where that make exists. Well, maybe we need that. I don't know. Maybe we don't. Maybe we just want this data. Maybe this capitalized name thing was kind of a play around idea, right? Daimler Chrysler is ID 7. There are no models. Here they are. ID 9 is Nissan. There are 2 models. Here they are, right? From this, we could start to build up a React app that maybe has those nice drop downs of our make and our model, such that once we pick a make, it draws out which models we want, right? We can start to build the JSON that we need in order to populate our interface, right? At least so far as having the makes and the models, right? And we have an admin interface where our users can come in and add new makes. What's somebody we don't have? BMW, right? And the 535, right? And the i3, and the i8.
And the M6.
There we go. All right. So if we come back to our makes.json, imagine if we had this makes.json feeding an app, right? Here's our ID10, BMW, there's 4 of them, and here they are. Right, so imagine if we had that React app already built to display these. Pretty easily, we came in and fiddled with a few things and built up an admin interface. It's not super pretty, but on maybe tomorrow, maybe on Monday, I will show you how to add just a little bit of CSS to this, whether it's Bulma or Bootstrap or your own, to style this into something that looks decent. Decent enough that if you were giving it to your internal customers or to yourself for making sure your app was working, it would be good enough. This isn't almost good enough. I mean, this is good enough for like, hey, we're working with the data, but I don't know if I would ship this even to my internal users. I'd make it a little bit prettier. I'd have a navigation bar at the top, some of those things. But I'm not necessarily going to put as much effort into the user interface that I will for what you've already done for your customer-facing interface, right? But you can imagine you could use this same stuff to build all of that, right? We still have navigation, linking, forms, submitting, and in some cases, maybe it's easier to do it all here, right? Just depends on which tools make the most sense to you, right? But for cranking out something that's like an admin interface, boy, it's pretty quick, right? Without too much code. Yeah, there's magic here and there's things you've got to remember and learn and do. But once you do it for one, it's pretty simple to do it for the rest. And that's, I think, one of the main things that makes Rails pretty powerful. We didn't even look at this, right? If I try and create a make without the validation, the error part is already filled in for me, how it presents errors, right? I said I skipped this part here, where on the form for a make, if the make errors any, if the errors array on a make has any, let's generate this little bit of HTML that renders this, right? Some number of errors prevented this page from being saved. Make a UL, iterate through all of the errors, and show that message on the page. The scaffold generated this for me, right? If we had more than one validates company name, length 5 to 20. Right? There's 2 errors on this page. Not only can the name not be blank, but it's also too short. Right? So if I typed in BMW, right, the company is too short. Well, that's a ridiculous thing, right? Maybe we also want it to be unique, right?
Meaning we can't do the same name again?
Yes, maybe it's distinct. Yeah, I can't. I already have a BMW. Is that not right? Distinct, unique. Let's look at validations. Rails guides, validations, uniqueness. Uniqueness, true, not unique. Uniqueness. Uniqueness is true. BMW. Right, that name's already been taken, and it won't let me create another BMW. Right, and then if I wanted to style this, I would just change the CSS rules. Here's the CSS for the scaffold, right? And I would find field with errors, right? And change the background color to purple, right? Or whatever my brand color is. That's horrible, right? But you get the idea, right? It gives me a set of CSS that's already filled in with the Rails defaults. I can just change those to whatever it is I need. And even if I don't like the way they generate them, right? This is done as an H2 and a bunch of ULs. I don't know, maybe I want these to be divs. I can come in and change this. I just have to then change the CSS to match, right? Scaffold is gonna spit out some defaults that the Rails core team thinks are good, right? And I think it's, they've never really made this any prettier than it is. This is basically how it's been since about 2006. Because they don't want you to be too comfortable relying on scaffold, right? They want you to take this and make it your own. So they don't make this too pretty, they just make it functionally enough, right? But you can imagine this is a pretty good like start. You're not starting from a blank page, right? You're not starting, where do I start from? This is at least something you can start to manipulate and turn into something that you want it to work, right? So think about that as you look at your final capstone. You don't have to do a API and a backend app if you don't feel like you totally have to. The choice is yours. I think it depends on what side of the world you're going to end up on, right? If you think like pretty hardcore, I'm going to do backend stuff, then all right, do a monolith Rails app. Cool. If you think, well, you know, not too sure, I'm probably gonna maybe do a little bit of both, then maybe you want to be on the side of making an API and doing a front end app and having them split apart, but still having a little admin side for your thing shows like, yeah, I learned how to do Rails user interfaces. I know how to make a monolithic style app. Even if you end up making a monolithic style .NET app, right, as your job, you end up in a Java place, right? The ideas of a monolith style versus a front-end, back-end API style are the same in whatever language framework you end up in. The commands and the style and the approach are just different, right? But the philosophy is the same. So I think that's why it's interesting to show you all how to do something like this, not just spit out an API, right? Because the API side is even simpler than this for the most part. Right, because we're just spitting out JSON. We don't have to worry about forms and inputs and redirects and nesting forms and all that. That all it's done on the React side. So I don't have to teach you anything new there to do that part. Cool. So tomorrow, I think what we'll do is we will finish up quickly the car and dealer stuff first thing in the morning, and then we'll spend the rest of the day building up some JSON to feed a user interface, and then we'll make the basic aspects of listing cars, searching for cars work in a React app. And we'll see how do we connect that React app to our Rails application? How do we build the React app inside of the Rails app? And then next week, what we'll layer onto that, probably on Monday, is how do we deploy that to production so we can share it on the web? How do we add authentication so we know users are logged in? How would we add authorization to let them do different things inside the app? We'll probably talk about things like geolocation, because I know a number of you have maps in your apps. Who's got maps in their apps? Yeah, at least 3 of you, right?
I don't have maps, but location.
Location, yeah. So we'll talk about how do we do location. Turning addresses into locations in Rails is super easy, right? So you can put in someone's address and figure out their latitude and longitude really easy, right? So like something like your Baru application, right? Or your photo one, right? When they click on that map to know, like they type in Tampa, Florida, you can get the location of Tampa and place it on the map. So those are some of the topics we'll talk about next week, right? As you're working through your capstone stuff, you know, if you've got time, lab time on Friday, you want to apply to that, or this weekend, start working through what we started on today, which is looking at your app and figuring out what your major models are and what their attributes are. So as most of you already come to show me your UI designs, that's great. Next thing is work on paper or in a text document what you think your models are and their attributes and what their relations are, and come and check in with me to see where those are, right? And from a timing perspective, sometime next week you should probably start building up that Rails application and start building maybe this admin interface for things, then build some of your JSON, then start to feed some of those things together, right? And we'll probably do it the same way we did it when we started out with the React. Take that JSON that you're going to get from your Rails application, statically copy it and paste it into your React app, turn your static things into dynamic, and then connect them to the live API. Right? Because from there, it's just like, once you have that API working on the back end, it's just like on the front end working with any API that's been provided to you, right? OneList or the weather API, it's just your API now. From that point, nothing is different. Right? So we're going to be on the back end for a while, building our models and our admin and our JSON API, and then we're going to flip back to the React side to build that up. Questions? No? Toby?
So for my capstone, I don't know where I would use something like this except when someone's creating an account.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible or is it too much of a pain to kind of, you know, when they sign in, do something like this and then switch back to React? That would be too much.
Yeah. This kind of thing you just mostly want for the administrative side of your application.
Yeah.
Take your app, for instance, your photo one. Maybe you want to pre-populate some albums and locations, right? You would make a little admin thing here to create a couple of those at a time, right? Or your brew one, right? Create a couple of breweries and put them in your app, right? The other thing we're going to talk about probably next week is how do you create pre-assigned data that your app needs, right? So notice here that we have a whole bunch of makes here, right? And I've typed these in, but there's a way to create what we call a seed file that would pre-populate all these into our database for us. Okay, so every time we made a new database, let's say, heaven forbid, your laptop dies, right? You've got to rebuild it, right? All right. And you've put a whole bunch of data in your app, right? And you've got to like rebuild your computer or your database dies, right? You don't want to have to like recode all this by hand. That's what a seed file is for. You type that into Ruby code and you just run a command and it repopulates all that data, right? And then you just use the admin interface to create, change, modify stuff as you need, right? So you don't have to make an admin interface if you don't want to. Don't feel like Toby, if you don't feel like your app would be useful for one, you don't have to make one, right? Chris, your app is one where like, I don't know, is an admin interface needed? Maybe not,
Yeah.
right? It's just connecting people, right? So the only reason you'd have an admin interface is someone's like, hey, I made a mistake, I want to delete something, or I meant to type in this, but I typed in that, right? And they send us support at your site. Somebody could go in and change that. But for yours, it's not wholly needed. So don't feel compelled to have to create one. I want you to practice it as homework, but don't feel like for your capstone you have to create one. The cheat is, what's it called? Admin. It's so common to make admin things. There are several built-in gems or libraries that give you a Rails admin. Let's have a demo. that give you an admin that's pretty like this out of the box, right? This exists just by dropping a gem into your library, right? And you get this admin interface without doing any coding. All this was done with no coding, right? So all you really need is a little admin thing in your app because you've got to be able to go in and fix data. Maybe you just throw an admin gem into your project and do it, right? So I suggest you create one because then if someone's like, hey, this has got a lot of back end, but you did all the front end in React. Our style is more monolith. Do you have any experience with that? Well, yes. I did at least a couple of pages on the monolith side to kind of show you that I know how to do routing and creating templates on a server and serving up the HTML from my server. But you don't have to. There's no requirement. Don't feel like there's a requirement for that for your capstone. So there's Rails admin. It just generates admin pages for you. And then the other one is called active admin. Active admin. This is actually what I used on my last project. Is there a demo? Check out the live demo, right? Literally with doing almost nothing, you get stuff that looks like this. Hey, here's all the products in our database. Please don't crash. Right? Here's all the products. Here's all the orders. Here's all the users. Right? This is done with almost no coding. Right? Right. Hey, look, view, edit, delete. It's kind of like we just did. Right? This is like taking scaffolding to the next level. But there's no like custom coding in here, just as an admin interface. Right? You wouldn't turn this into a product, but if you needed to bolt on an admin to your app, boy, this sure is easy. Right? So don't feel like you're compelled to. If you get to like the last week, you're like, oh shoot, I really need some kind of admin interface. I didn't build one. Let's just throw one of these into your app and be good. All right? You can see it's not that hard. It's just essentially adding a gem to your product, to your project, and adding a little bit of configuration, and poof, off you go. Cool. Questions? It's a lot, right? And the date's coming, right?
It's like a hump though, right? I mean, it's a lot right now.
Yeah. What you'll find is once you figure out your models and you create your database and you create a couple of controllers and that API, once you create that first API that returns some data and you connect that to your React app, right, now you're at high speed, right? Now you're just repeating that process and refining that, right? And if you look at what the last two cohorts have done, that's essentially what they did. It's a big push to get to that point where you have your first API endpoint returning a list of albums or your matches, right, or your breweries. But once you get that done, it's just iterating on that and tweaking it to get it to the point where it does what you want it to do. But it's this big hump to get to that point. And then after that, it really is sailing. And if you started with a good static interface and you have at least some part of it in React, right, you are way ahead of the game, right? Because once we set up that endpoint that returns as JSON, you've seen what it happens. Like you've done this already. If that JSON already existed, if every one of your backends already existed, how far do you think you would be from something working? Not very far, right? So now you just have to build that backend, and that's what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks. And it's not that bad.
We are like right now doing pretty good.
Yeah. I think you all, at least so far, in terms of percentage of people who have like listened to the process, are a pretty high percentage of people. Like the class has done what we've asked. Like even with what you've all shown me so far, right? Even if you just have static pages or you've got them hooked up to React Router, right? You could show that to somebody and be like, hey, look, my app works. If you filled in the things with the data that you like is the happy path of your app, no one would know that's not an app.
Right,
It wouldn't be until you turned it over to somebody when I typed in my name and Gavin showed up. What? Right? That someone would know it's not real. So that's pretty far, right? You just have to hook that up to real data. And you've done that a number of times, right? We've been doing that essentially since week 3, right? So we just got to get to the point where we can model correctly. That's what I want you all to be thinking about now, right? These next couple of days and this weekend, be thinking about the models for your app. Once you come and show me your models, I'm like, yeah, these relationships are correct and all these fields are correct. Go scaffold all that into your app, right? I'll show you, don't make a Rails app yet because I want to show you how to do it the right way. But once you scaffold that, and we put an API on it, you will find things will happen pretty quickly, and you'll be in really good shape. Cool. Yeah, I'm pleased with where y'all are. I think y'all did a good job using the break to build good stuff. Cool.